No fluff, just answering questions that people submit ahead of time. And we record all of these and they go out to YouTube, which I'm setting up right now. And all right, we're live. Cool. All right. So my name is Chris Berry with Castle Wealth Group, certified law attorney, certified financial planner. And we always like to start these with a positive focus, just something positive that happened within the last week or so, either professionally or personally. And a lot of times it's family related, because that's why we do a lot of this, is to help good families plan, protect, and preserve what's important. And so just this past week, my kids are awesome. And I'm sure everyone thinks their kids are awesome. And I'm no difference, but my daughter, she's been playing select soccer and just seeing her improvement, even just last night. She has practices 2 days a week, and I used to coach her and I love coaching her, but just seeing her skill development as she's moved up to the select level, it's pretty awesome. And she's really doing good. And then my son, oh my God, he is like a little fish in the water. He can't do swim team yet. That's going to be next year as he goes into the next grade. That's the first time they offer a swim team, but he's in this like pre-swim team competition and class, and they had like a fake swim meet. And he's probably one of the youngest ones in the group, and he won like all of his races. I never did swim team. I'm trying to think of what they're called. He didn't win the relay, but he made up time on the person that was ahead of him and ended up tying him. So I was just really impressed. And I don't like going to the swim meets because it's so hot in there and I'm like a big sweater. So this was the first time seeing him in his swim class in this session. So I was just amazed. It was awesome watching him. So that's my positive focus. And I think it's important with all the craziness going out in the world, sometimes think about some of the positive things that are happening. And so those are my positive focuses. All right, now I'm going to share my screen. And I only have 2 questions. Both of them are pretty juicy in terms of getting into things. But if you do have a question, feel free to submit it to the Q&A. Or if there's something that is unclear as I'm presenting, feel free to put it into the chat. And someone wrote, "That's great." Yeah, it's kind of cool. Then my daughter, she had a math and a social studies test, got 100 on both. Yeah, it's good. Somehow I got some good kids, so I'm happy with that. All right, and so again, this is general information. You want to see how this, I'm very proud, yes. Might be a bias too, but proud and biased. There's nothing wrong with that. So this is general information. If you want to see how this applies to your situation, just reach out, reply, schedule some time. And again, if something's unclear, feel free to put in the Q&A or to the chat. So first question, my wife has dementia. I'm taking care of her, but her dementia is getting to the point where I won't be able to take care of her much longer. What are my options? Well, this is getting to what we call the elder care journey of, you know what, we start off relatively healthy, and then as we begin to age, we need more and more assistance. So we always start here, just, okay, what level of care are we at? Or where are we at in terms of health? And then the most important thing is figuring out what level of care do we need. So if we're living at home with assistance, but maybe now we need assisted living or nursing home care, understand that the costs for these are going to be different. Like these days, nursing homes are going about $10,000 to $15,000 per month. Assisted living with memory care is about $5,000 to $8,000 a month. Just regular assisted living is about $2,000 to $5,000. Independent communities, maybe 1 to 3. And then home care is generally about $20 to $30 an hour. I have one client right now they're paying basically round the clock care. They're paying $20,000 a year to keep their 99-year-old dad at home. Let's see a question coming in. So about $20,000 a month to keep their dad at home. And he's a veteran, and so that's where we're always looking at different ways to bring in money to help pay for long-term care, whether it's VA benefits or Medicaid, which can help pay for nursing home care. But in terms of, so always like the most important thing is like, where are they on the continuum of like health? That's not something like I'm in a position to decide. So sometimes we bring in social workers, that type of thing. But then once we decide what level of care do we need or where are we going, then that's when I get more involved in terms of, okay, now that we know kind of what the path is, what's the cost of care, then we can develop some strategies. But really, and we've talked about this, at the end of the day, there's only 6 ways to pay for long-term care. We can private pay, just pay out of our own funds. We can have the kids pay. A lot of times they pay in terms of their time, not necessarily the money. We can have long-term care insurance, and I'll talk more about that. Medicare pays for short-term rehab. It doesn't really pay for long-term care. A VA benefit, we used to do a lot of this before they changed some of the rules around it, but we could bring in extra, maybe $2,000 a month. And then last is Medicaid. And Medicaid pays for nursing home care, but it's not going to pay for long-term care. So ideally, when we're planning ahead, typically we're looking at 2 kind of strategies. And maybe VA benefits if it's available. And really, it all falls into what we call 2 categories. So we call it pre-planning. So what can we do like prior to needing nursing home care? And then we have crisis planning. So when we're planning ahead, depending on how early we are, like maybe we're planning before we get a dementia diagnosis or Parkinson's diagnosis or Alzheimer's or whatever it may be. Really here, we look at things like the Castle Trust, which is an asset protection trust, to start that 5-year clock to protect against Medicaid, so that we can move assets into the trust. And then if we make it 5 years, everything before we need a nursing home, everything inside of the trust is protected from that nursing home or Medicaid spend down. So now we can have Medicaid pay that base level of care, and then we have a pot of resources available to pay for additional services. So that's something that we do a lot of in terms of setting up that legal structure. But then we can look at it from a financial and insurance perspective. And I'm not a big fan of pure traditional long-term care insurance, but there are other strategies. So there's what we call asset-based long-term care strategies, which is like a death benefit plus a long-term care benefit. There is underwriting. There's cash value life insurance or index universal life insurance, which is like a death benefit plus a long-term care benefit plus tax-free income. So those are 2 kind of financial insurance planning strategies ahead. Also, but both of these require underwriting. So these kind of go hand in hand. But if we already have dementia, then one strategy would be an income strategy. I'll just take this up here. An income strategy where, let's say we use a tool to create income, and I'm just making up numbers. Let's say it's $30,000 a year. But then if we need long-term care, then that amount of income coming out doubles. And now we have $60,000 a year coming out, even if there's no cash value left in the investment. The nice thing about this is there's no underwriting. So in this situation, we already have a dementia diagnosis. But one thing we have to do is we have to make it 2 years before we trigger the long-term care doubler. So that might be something to help pay for assisted living, plus take out some of the market volatility. And so the tool here, it's a income fixed index annuity that has a long-term care doubler. And I'm not saying that's the best way everyone should go, but if you already have a diagnosis, that's something that's available to leverage your funds. Plus, maybe you would want to consider, in this situation where we already have a diagnosis, maybe we want to look at the Castle Trust to start that 5-year clock to protect against devastating costs of nursing home care. But then you might want to look at a fixed index annuity that has a long-term care doubler to help pay for home care and assisted living. And then, of course, if you're a veteran or a surviving spouse of a veteran, we could also look at VA benefits. So that's planning ahead. The other option is crisis planning. And so here we can do at the very least what we call a half loaf plan, where if you have a loved one in a nursing home right now, we can protect roughly half of the assets. It's kind of complicated how we can do it. But think of it as half of the money can be gifted away even within that 5-year mark. And then the other half has to go to a nursing home. So really it's just how far, and most clients don't really have a crystal ball to know this answer, but how long before we think we need a nursing home? If we think it might be 3+ years, then let's focus on some pre-planning strategies. Maybe it's the fixed index annuity with the long-term care doubler, or maybe it's the Castle Trust to protect the assets from the devastating cost of nursing home care, because we already have a diagnosis. So we're a little bit limited in our options. Because we already have a diagnosis, we can't look at any of these strategies. So that's where we would go in terms of figure out how to pay for care, which is one of the things that we specialize in as a certified LO attorney. So hopefully that was helpful. So let me see any questions, chat coming in. How do I think about geopolitical? I'll talk about that in a second. All right, number 2, and then this is the last question I have other than what was just submitted. You set up our trust, but we use separate financial planner and separate CPA. They recommend we don't name the IRAs as beneficiaries of the trust. Can you explain the pros and cons? And yeah, so this is one of my big frustrations, is that there's a lot of like not quite accurate information out there. So I bet you if you ask 9 out of 10 CPAs or financial planners, they would say never to name a trust as a beneficiary of the IRA, which I think is completely wrong. And whenever I have a conversation with clients or their advisors, if we're not handling the finances or the tax side of things, the advisors always come around. But this is I had it submitted as a question again, and it's probably something that I've been answering since 2005. So here's the issue, and I'll talk about the history behind this and where it's at now. So whenever you have these qualified accounts, like let's say an IRA, the concern was being able to stretch out the taxes upon death. Like we don't want, let's say you have $1 million IRA, we don't want your beneficiaries to have to pay all the tax right away, because that's going to just drive up their tax bracket, right? And so to be able to stretch, you had to name basically a designated beneficiary. So a designated beneficiary is an individual. It cannot be like an entity or a charity. And so this is where you have to understand the rules. There's general information is good, but you need to understand like the exceptions to the general rules. So if a designated beneficiary is like an individual, but it cannot be a charity, cannot be an entity like a LLC. So the question is, if you look at it at a general, how do I submit a question in advance? Just reply to the email or send us an email at contact@castlewealthgroup.com and just put in the subject line like wisdom webinar. Or if you have a question right now, feel free to type it into the Q&A or the chat. But I'm talking about, okay, IRAs. So if it doesn't qualify as a designated beneficiary, so if it's a non-designated beneficiary, which we want to try to avoid, then you're stuck with a 5-year payout. Okay. So obviously we want it to qualify as a designated beneficiary. And here's the thing, if a trust is set up correctly, it qualifies as a designated beneficiary. Okay. Not all trusts are set up correctly. So that's the first problem. And so that's, I think, where the generalities came from. So if like a financial planner or CPA didn't necessarily trust the estate planning attorney, then they just say, well, I don't want to mess with that, so let's stretch it out, or let's name the kids as the beneficiaries. Or they just don't understand the kind of the nuance of the question. So all of our trusts qualify as designated beneficiaries, so we can stretch it out. And in fact, since probably 2006, we would set up stretch IRA trusts, like trusts specifically to stretch out the IRAs. Because there was a private letter ruling that said if you set up the trust in a very specific way, you can stretch it out. So we set up a lot of stretch IRA trusts. And then unfortunately, what happened in 2020 is the Secure Act. And actually, let me take a step back. Why would you want to name the trust as the beneficiary? Because a lot of times the way we set up our trust is we're giving the kids an opportunity. So whatever they inherit from you could be protected for their lifetime. And they have this opportunity where whatever they inherit from you, if anything, could be protected for their lifetime from creditors, from divorce, and the money stays in the bloodline or stays in the family. The only way that happens is if you name the trust as a beneficiary. So if you have advisors saying, don't name the trust as a beneficiary, you're missing out on this big opportunity. And another reason why is, I'll tell you, a lot of lawyers, all they say is it goes out right to the kids at a specific age of like 25, 30, 35. So if the kids are 35 plus, it doesn't really matter. But I would say a majority of the trusts that we set up give the kids an opportunity to lifetime of asset protection. And so if you name the kids outright, instead of naming the trust, they miss out on that asset protection. So the way that we set up our trusts is that there's no downside, and all you have is the upside of the ability to protect the assets. And so that's where you have these two other professionals who are saying, name the kids outright. Well, you're actually putting the client in a worse situation. And so that's one of the reasons that we do this legal, financial, and tax planning, trying to bring it all together to see the whole picture. But then we have the 2020 Secure Act that says, okay, great. If you name a designated beneficiary, you get at most a 10-year stretch. So we don't do a lot of trusts specifically for the IRAs. Now we just do one trust, everything flows into the one trust, and whatever they inherit can be protected for their lifetime from divorces, creditors, et cetera. If we're setting up either what we call one of our legacy trusts or castle trusts. If we're doing a base trust in our world, then that's kind of the old school way of just outright. So that killed like the stretch IRA. We still name the trust as a beneficiary because all the taxes have to be paid within 10 years. It's not like the trust has to be wrapped up within 10 years. So I guess my point with it is it's one of my big frustrations is I'm not going to say who the client was or hypothetical client that sent it in, is they have two advisors telling them one thing and then I'm on an island telling them something else. But I've been in this position since 2005 when we've been doing these IRA stretch trusts. And so now I told the client to, you know what, let's have a conference call if you don't trust me. And what happens is 100% of the time, once we explain it and explain the rules and I have the private letter rulings to back it up, they're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We name the trust as beneficiary. So yeah, if we did one of your trusts and you have a legacy trust or castle trust, we always name spouse first, almost always, and then the trust is a contingent beneficiary for IRAs. And that's just one of those things I've had that conversation probably 100 times, not just with clients, but their advisors. That part's kind of scary. All right, here's the last question that was submitted just now. So if you do have any more questions, please put it in the Q&A. All right, so the question is geopolitical risk, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan. So the question's really getting at like geopolitical risk what effect that might have. And I was talking to a client today, great guy, worked, hypothetical client today, worked at like the New York Port Authority, just salt of the earth, great gentleman. And we're just talking about like where the world's going. And like, it's kind of a scary place out there. And yeah, so for a lot of my clients, most of my clients are around retirement age, either about to retire or retired. And one of our jobs, or I think one of the things that we do is we try to figure out what our clients are concerned about and alleviate those risks. And there's a lot of risks out there. So geopolitical risk. So if you have investments internationally, we can run a report to see how much you have locally, US versus international. And maybe we want to scale back that international side of things. But that's not the only risk out there. The legislative risk, right? Changes in law, tax risk, long-term care risk, right? Probate risk. Market risk, right? Big one, longevity risk, like outliving your money, which can exacerbate all these other risks. So that's where what we try to do is create a plan to try to alleviate these. Like at the end of the day, our job is to put together a plan that's going to offer you comfort so you can sleep well at night, confidence, if I could spell it, and clarity. And so that's where, you know what, if this is something that's keeping you up at night, let's take a look at your portfolio and see, hey, what international exposure do I have? I had a hypothetical client where very concerned about market volatility and moves about $1 million into safety and growth. And one of his questions was, he was concerned about geopolitical risk and wanted to know if, hey, this company that we're moving the money to, are they investing in China? And so the answer to that question was no, but we alleviated that geopolitical risk that he had. So yeah, I think it's a scary time out there. And if geopolitical risk is something that's keeping you up at night, and probably it should, because not only is it affecting like, hey, if you have investments over there, but it affects a lot of these other things like market risk. Like the markets don't like things like that typically. Another inflation risk is another one right now. Big one, right? Where I hypothetically met with a client today who had about 230,000 sitting in checking and savings and has a really good pension coming in. And we talked about, hey, your money's actually going backwards. You think you're being safe and avoiding market volatility, but in reality, you're kind of going broke safely and slowly. There's things that can offer that safety and principal protection, but then give you a better rate of return. So yeah, at the end of the day, like our job is to alleviate this risk. And that's typically the people that we work with. They've done a good job of accumulating wealth and things, and now they want to protect it from probate, protect it from family members fighting, protect it from market volatility, protect it from long-term care costs, protect it from tax risk, which I think is one of the biggest risks out there right now. So thank you. All right, a couple other questions coming in. What is your beneficiary recommendation for Roth IRA? So we have a Roth, whoops, I never want to do a Roth in red. I love Roths. We'll do a Roth in green. So we have a Roth IRA. How do I recommend to name that as beneficiary? It depends on your planning, but typically what we do is we do spouse first, and then if not spouse, then trust as beneficiary. And if you don't have any spouse, then you name the trust as a primary beneficiary. Big fan of Roths. Yeah, as same hypothetical client. We're talking about kind of concerns with like companies even, and whether to take a pension or a 401k. And he was telling me like he's telling his kids to stay away from the pensions and look for more of the 401ks because the company could go under, they could change your pension, that type of thing. And then I just brought up, even better, look at a Roth 401k, where if you can have this money growing tax-free, then you might be in a better position. All right, and then I have one last question. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. At some point, the IRA developed rules for the Secure Act and the 10-year rule, which included annual RMDs. I believe the IRS has since changed to assess totally distributed taxes at 10 years. Yeah, so what happened is the IRS said that upon death, so this is for beneficiaries. So when you have a beneficiary or inherited IRA, not a spouse, but anyone else, IRS beneficiary, they said that all the taxes have to be paid within 10 years. And then there was some confusion because the IRS put out a publication without updating the publication for the Secure Act. So even the IRS screwed it up. So the question was, okay, years 1 through 10, is it like 1/10 has to come out every year? Or is it years 1 through 10, the RMD, which could be like a much lower number, has to come out each year? And then you just have to make sure it's all done by year 10? Or is it just at any point during the 10 years? So originally we thought this is what the IRS was saying, and you could do this if you wanted to, but then there was a publication that said, no, this is what it was, which didn't make any sense. But then the IRS further clarified it. So really, it's just all the taxes have to be paid within 10 years, or if it's a Roth, all the money has to come out within 10 years. Okay. So again, it doesn't have to be like equal amounts. It just has to be that if it's pre-tax IRA, all the taxes have to be paid within 10 years. And it could be nothing, and then year 10, you pay it all. Or it could be 1/10 every year, or it could be whatever you want. So it's just all the taxes have to be paid within 10 years. And then if it's a Roth, then you just have to take it out of the Roth within 10 years. And typically with a Roth, I'd say leave it there till year 10 and then take it out. But yeah, it was kind of interesting because the Secure Act passed, and then this publication, and like everyone understood what the Secure Act was saying with regards to those RMDs upon death. But then they had a publication that just threw a wrench into it. And that's where Ed Slott, who I've trained under, is known as America's CPA, been on PBS and stuff, kind of clarified it, and the IRS finally came back and clarified it. All right, that's it with the questions. Here's a comment. Would you please take a bit more time with your handwriting, or have the overheads pre-prepared for readability? Something you can take more time to write your notes. Unfortunately, no. A lot of times these questions are coming in on the fly, and plus my handwriting is god awful from the beginning. So yeah, my handwriting is probably not going to get any better. When we do webinars, we have PowerPoints and it's much more structured, but this is more of a freewheeling, almost like a classroom style. So think of me as a teacher or professor with horrible handwriting, and it might turn some people off, but I tell you, ever since I was in 1st through 5th grade, we would get either making progress or needs to improve, making progress, or exceeding expectations. And my parents can vouch for me with this. I think these were my only needs to improve 1st through 5th grade were in neatness and handwriting. So unfortunately, that's not something that's going to improve, but I appreciate it. All right, any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, sold. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the questions. If you do want to submit questions ahead of time, feel free to feel free to just reply to the email that you received for the Zoom, or you can always email us at contact@Castle Wealth Group. I really enjoy answering these questions, keeps me on my toes. And it reminds me of the times pre-pandemic when we could do our workshops. We used to do workshops, 20, 25 people, and it was a lot of energy. And so I appreciate the opportunity to continue to kind of do these virtually, at least for now. So thank you so much. Make it a great week. Take care.